Next thing we're going to do is install the transmission shift shaft. This is the NOS part I showed in a previous video. In order to do that, I'm going to have to pull this C-clip or E-clip off, as well as this washer, because those will go on this side, and this is the hole that the shifter will come through. They will go on this side after I push the shaft through from the opposite end. So I'll remove these two pieces here, flip the engine around, or I'll put it up so it's sitting vertically like this, and then work the shaft through from the opposite side. I'm going to grease the end of the shaft here, as well as the inside of the seal, again to ease its transition through the seal. Take my time, and then I have to align these engagement fingers here into the shift drum. We're about ready now to install the shift shaft. I have greased rather than oiled the end of the shaft where the splines are there, so that it doesn't run off, as well as I greased the shaft itself that will slide through the seal on the left side of the case. I also oiled the inside of the seal itself. So now what I'll do is I'll slide this through like this. There's two things I have to pay attention to. One is this spring arrangement. See if I can get a better shot of that for you. Right here, I have to separate these fingers and they'll fit around a dowel pin. You can't quite see it here. That frankly is what I view will be my biggest challenge. These can be a little bit of a struggle getting that just right so these fingers snap over that dowel. It's just a retainer. And then I have to get these fingers to engage in the shift drum. I don't think that's going to be near as complicated. Once everything's in, then I'll go and install the retainer washer and clip, E-clip, C-clip on the opposite side. That's what keeps the shaft from sliding in and out. Okay, we're about ready to install the shift shaft. I've tried to get the best angle for your viewing. It's not an easy thing to do, and I don't have the best lighting, so we're going to just have to work through this together. I did grease the end of the shift shaft here with grease rather than oil, because oil is just going to run off or run down. I also greased the shaft itself, as well as the inside of the seal on the opposite end, just to ease the transition of the shaft through the seal. Regarding this spring here, this return spring, that's just to allow the shaft to return as you activate it with your foot on the pedal. I took my large screwdriver and just wedged the spring fingers over that square tab there, and then making sure that the spring itself also is over the boss on the end of the shift shaft. Now it should be a matter of just sliding this through and then engaging the shift drum fingers here as we go. Put my finger over the left side over the seal so I can feel the shaft coming through. Just ease it through like that. Lift the fingers up out of the way. Then I have to wedge that spring like that over that dowel pin, or that pin right there. Then make sure it's engaged like that. So the shaft is in. It's engaged here, the return fingers. I know you probably can't see that. And the shift drum fingers here are engaged also. Wish I could get you a little bit better angle of that, but I have to really do it in this position. To do it up on its side isn't really effective for me. So now I'm going to shift the position of the engine up onto its right side and install the washer and the clip. I think you can see right here the screwdriver is pointing to is where the clip engages. See if I can get that. There we go, where that clip will engage. But the first thing that goes on is a washer, like that. We'll pull the shaft up far enough to allow that clip to engage. And then we'll use a pair of pliers to snap it into position, like that. Make sure it's seated. And now the shift shaft is installed. From this point on, we've got to be careful because this shaft obviously, let me go back out. From now on, now that the shift shaft is installed, we have to be careful because this shaft extends out a considerable distance beyond the end of the engine. And when obviously we don't want to bend it or damage it, I'll probably clean the grease off the splines here and then just wrap this with some tape just to protect the splines while I'm manhandling the engine around. So the shift shaft is now installed. I went and tracked down a box that you can see here. I cut 2 holes in it, one for the shift shaft that goes through like this, and one for the crankshaft. Just cut a couple holes. It's a fairly heavy duty box. I keep a lot of boxes around in my pole barn where I have storage of my spare bikes. And that way I can elevate the engine and not bear on the, in particular, the recently installed shift shaft. Rather, right here, it's underneath the engine. And then I just wedged a piece of 2x4 here underneath it to kind of steady it up. So we got that taken care of. The next thing we're going to talk about here is the Kickstarter, or installing the Kickstarter mechanism. Here's the main components off here to the left. Let's talk about parts organization a little bit for a few minutes. I keep all the major components, I don't know if you can see that or not, where I wrote Kickstarter on this heavy duty plastic bag on both sides, so it doesn't, if one side wears off, I can still read it. So all of these parts were in this bag, and I placed them in the bag when I first disassembled the engine. It's very easy when you're taking apart a project such as this to get in a hurry or not pay a lot of attention to sequence or the little odds and ends that are important, and you will be sorry about later if you didn't take the time to identify parts correctly. And allow me to give you an illustration. This gear right here is the main gear. It fits over this shaft right there. And there is a boss, you can see there on the back side. There is no boss on the front side. That's just a washer right there. You can see that. So when I disassembled the engine and I took this off, there's a washer and a clip that secures this in place on this shaft right here. So when I took it off, I removed the clip, removed the washer, of course, set them aside, and then I wrote immediately, I wiped off the gear and wrote out, which means that faces out when it's installed. I pulled the gear off, and on the opposite side I wrote in, which means the in goes installed in. The reason I do it multiple times is these can get wiped off real easy in handling and or cleaning, and I wanted to make sure that this is clearly identified. So 6 months, 8 months later, which is really where I'm at now from when I first disassembled the engine, I don't have to wonder, well, which way does the boss go? I could go look up the parts fiche. Sometimes that will indicate, sometimes it won't. But you go through that consternation of trying to figure that out. This way, you don't have to worry about it. I know automatically that this is the in and this is the out face of the gear. I also then, as you see, I use a couple of zip ties and zip tied the washer and the clip right to the gear so that they don't get misplaced. Same thing on the spring. The spring carrier, this aluminum spring carrier, in the spring itself, that's the return spring from the Kickstarter. There's a clip that will secure this in place also. When I remove this assembly, I keep everything exactly as it came off as much as I can, and then secure the clip immediately to the carrier, the spring carrier, so that it didn't get misplaced or lost. That way I know I've always got the original parts and don't have to wonder, is this the right spring clip? Is that the same spring clip if I was just to throw them in a box? They are slightly different in size, but it'd be easy to be confused and it gets frustrating. So my coaching to folks, if you're going to take apart an engine this far, this deep into the engine, take your time, identify your parts, take lots of photos, keep your components together like this and like this, and if there's any opportunity to confuse orientation, label them. Use a piece of tape, use a marker or a Sharpie like I did here, whatever. It doesn't make any difference what you're going to do, just do something. Here on the Kickstart shaft itself, there's also a washer and a circlip, and I put them right back on the way they came off so that I know exactly what goes where again. So now I've got 3 clips. I've got this one, and this one that are all very similar in size. A couple of them, in fact, might be the same size. I'd have to check. But this way there's no confusion. This is the, let's move on. This is the Kickstarter Pawl, P-A-W-L. And the way this works is the ratcheting mechanism. I'm going to hold it down with my index finger. I think you can see there how that pawl works. Right, so that allows it to ratchet and then twist clockwise with my right hand. It engages here and will allow the engine to turn over, and that's how it ratchets. It's not uncommon for these pawls, that's this arm right here, to wear and start to slip. In fact, Suzuki's, smaller Suzuki's, Enduros are a bit known for that, for this pawl wearing out. I've replaced them on several bikes over the years, as well as on the TS185 I rebuilt a couple of years ago. I replaced the pawl and I think the gear itself. The same design. Almost all these bikes use a very similar design and concept. Execution might vary a little bit, but the concept is the same. There is a plunger down in here. There's a plunger in here. See if I can get a better view of that for you. Right there. There's a plunger with a spring. So that plunger is pushing against, let me get a better shot of this for you. So that plunger is pushing against a spring that sits down in a drilling down in here. So it keeps constant pressure up against that pawl. I did inspect these parts. I did not take them apart. I don't take these apart unless I have to. Like a lot of things, unless I have to take it apart, I don't. I did do a visual inspection of the pawl with a flashlight down in here, and it's not particularly worn, and I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this rather than source new parts. I don't think I need to. I also checked the splines here on the end of the shaft. That's where the kickstart arm will engage once it's installed. And those splines are in very good shape, actually, much better than the shift shaft was. And the shaft itself is in good shape. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install this idler gear for the, well, it's not really an idler gear, to be honest with you. It actually is an engagement gear for the Kickstarter. So what I'll do, I'm going to cut these zip ties off, invert the gear. I'm going to put a little assembly lube on the shaft, drop it over, and engage the washer and the clip. We've got the assembly lube on the shaft. I've got my gear, it is clean. I could put lubricant on the inside of the bearing surface there, but I'm not going to. Orient it with in, facing obviously in or down. Drop the bearing over, or drop the gear over like that. Put the washer in place. And now we're going to install the clip. Make sure it's engaged in the slot, which it is. And now that's in place. The only thing left to do now, again, this is just due to my anal retentive personality. There we go. I just wanted to orient that vertically. Wipe off the excessive gear lube. So now the engagement gear for the clutch. This will engage the clutch basket eventually, and the kicker shaft here. Next thing we're going to install is the return spring for the kicker, or kick shaft. This hook here engages under this boss right here. I don't know if we can get a better look of that or not. Right there. This engages like that. Okay. There is this retainer ring clip. So what I'm going to do is remove the zip ties. There's a clip. Now we're going to go ahead and install the Kickstarter mechanism. One thing I like to point out is right here there's a stop that will engage against this stop here. So when you turn it like this clockwise, this stop eventually hits here and prevents it from continuing forward. That'll be important to us in a moment. But right now what I'm going to do is put just a little assembly lube on this bearing surface here, which fits down into the hole, and we'll drop this into place. We'll engage the gears like that, and then we're going to rotate it clockwise until that stop I alluded to a moment ago connects with the stop under here. So it can't go any further clockwise, but it can go counterclockwise like that. I want it against the stop. Now to install the spring itself, the bottom cup retainer just drops over. By the way, I never took this assembly apart. You see here with that circlip and the washer, there was no need to. The only time I would take that apart is if I had to get at the pawl on the opposite side. But since I didn't do that, I didn't take it apart. So the cup goes down. So obviously it nests like that. So the cup fits down like that. I'm going to remove the top aluminum boss. And now is probably the trickiest part. You've got to make sure, again, that shaft is counterclockwise against the stop. There's a hole. I didn't really show that. I should have. But there's a hole right here drilled through this shaft that the end of this spring engages with. And looking at the pictures that I took when I disassembled it, and I recall paying particular attention to this being against the stop. It's just logical. I have to engage the end of the spring here with the hole over here to the left to the 11 o'clock position, 10 o'clock position. So that's what I'm going to do now. Then I'm going to twist this end of the spring around and engage it under this boss. It's not really as hard as it sounds. It's just a little fiddly. So I'm going to engage the spring like that in the hole. I'm going to pull the spring down against the cup, and then I'm going to rotate this around like this and engage it here with the stop. So now this is engaged like that. I'm going to take this cup that's got a notch that engages here, holding the spring down like that. Then the circlip will go over the top and engage. If I can't get this. A little bit too far. There we go. So now that's engaged. Rotate that around to the top. Now this whole mechanism can't come off because it's held by this circlip right here. Okay? Now I don't have enough strength in my hand to rotate this. If I put the Kickstarter arm on here, I could. I'm not sure where it is right now. It's off in my part storage. But so now the Kickstarter mechanism is installed. Now that the kickstart mechanism shift shaft is installed, everything having to do with the shift drum is done. We'll move on to the clutch basket, which will fit over this shaft here, the primary drive, and continue on with the build-up. So that's going to be it for this this particular video today. Any questions, drop me a note. Otherwise, thanks for watching.